part of the reason I got this book is because John Duns Scotus is a blessed. If he hadn't been a blessed, then I might have thought, well, I'm sure he has some interesting things to say. There's a lot of philosophers and theologians in the Middle Ages who had interesting things to say. Why should I read this one in particular? But the fact that he's a blessed immediately gives him more standing, and that's the case even if in a Thomism dominated church. He seems to have a lower status than philosophers from the sort of more mainstream tradition today. So maybe we could start talking about just who he was as a person and why he was beatified.
Yeah, I think first, let me say, I think that's an excellent reason to pick and choose who you're going to read about from the Middle Ages. There are a lot of people, and does everyone need to know the ins and outs of William Occam's philosophy? No, then he wasn't canonized in any way. So I think you should rest easy in ignorance of him, if you are. And then someone like Duns Scotus comes along, and maybe you've heard some bad things about him, some controversial things, but yeah, he is a blessed, and so for that very reason, I think you're right, deserves to be taken seriously. I do think that he is less important than St. Thomas Aquinas, but still important. Sadly, though, we don't know very much about his life at all, and here's basically what we know. He was born in a town called Duns, which is now in Scotland. He was sent to Oxford at an early age, maybe as early as 12 or 13 years old. Some records say that he also spent time in Cambridge, but we're not sure. He was ordained a priest right around 24, 25 years old. And we actually use the date of his ordination to calculate the year of his birth as either 1265 or 1266. He made great progress at Oxford. He was a real standout, so they sent him to Paris to continue his theological education and then eventually occupy the top-level teaching job for Franciscans at the University of Paris, the Regent Master, as the position was known. And Franciscan friars would occupy this chair for about 2 years and then usually get sort of substituted out, or rotated out, I should say. And so the next guy up would take the chair, and then the former occupant would then be, put to work in some other way. And when Scotus was finished in his turn at Regent Master, not too long thereafter, he was sent to Cologne, Germany, where there was a relatively young Franciscan house of studies. It's surprising to historians why he went there. We don't know the exact reason why, because compared to places like the University of Paris and the University of Oxford, or even the University of Cambridge, Cologne was a intellectual backwater. And we really literally just don't know why. There's some, I think, reasonable speculation, but nothing that we can have much confidence in. And unfortunately, he died in Cologne only about a year after he got there in 1308. So the motto that summarizes his biography is, England begot me, France educated me, Cologne holds me. And sure enough, at the Minorite church, the Franciscan church in Cologne, Scotus's remains are entombed.
And so, what was the reason that he was beatified only recently, right, by John Paul II in the early 90s?
Yeah, in 1993, and it was a partial culmination of a long process that started in the first half of the 20th century with a greater recognition of Scotus's place in the development of what is now the dogma of the Immaculate Conception. And the idea was if this medieval theologian got it so right about Mary, maybe we should take his overall thought and his overall life a little bit more seriously with respect to canonization. The problem was that his texts were in quite a disorderly state, and so there were scholarly confusion about which texts were authentic, and of the authentic texts, which manuscript tradition preserved the most accurate versions thereof. So there was a commission established at the Vatican, the Scotistic Commission, and the idea was, let's get a scholarly team together to come up with authoritative editions of his texts, and then he will be able to, be subject to the rigors of the canonization process. So 1993 represented, like I say, a partial culmination, because the hope for many of us is that eventually he might be made a saint. But the reason, the primary theological grounds, at least as given by Pope John Paul II, are one, that Scotus was a defender of the Immaculate Conception, and two, in a kind of colorful phrase, Scotus is a minstrel or poet of the Incarnation. And so for John Paul II, it was the combination of these emphases in Scotus, this cosmic centrality of Christ, not just for human salvation, but with respect to the whole universe. God becomes incarnate in Christ to be the incarnate king of the whole cosmos, not just the one who saves human beings from their sin. And then two, as closely related to that emphasis on Christ and the incarnation, the dogma of the Immaculate Conception comes along and says, in part, and this isn't the whole story, but in part, that to be the mother of Christ is, such a great honor, part of what God has in mind by preserving the Blessed Virgin Mary from all sin from the moment of her conception, is as a way of both honoring his mom and also honoring himself. So these really do go together in John Paul II's reflections on Scotus's contribution to the church, and they were offered as the primary reason for his being made a blessed. Now, Franciscans themselves preserve traditions of Scotus's sanctity,
Okay.
but we don't have historical. There were very early biographies of St. Thomas Aquinas, early biographies of St. Francis, as written by Bonaventure. Bonaventure himself had a very public-facing career, and so we know a lot of the facts of his life. Whereas Scotus, you could think of him more as the quiet teacher who had a sort of boldness when it came to defending the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception in public, but that didn't seem to have been his main modus operandi, so to speak. So unfortunately, there's just a lot that we don't know about his private life, and whether that will be a permanent impediment to his canonization, I can't say. I would hope that someone reading the book would be able to, even if they don't end up agreeing with Scotus or find the writing persuasive intellectually, would be able to see that Scotus should not be thought of, especially by Catholics, as this innovating, disrupting, nitpicking figure that he's often made out to be. He was obviously, for people who read his writing firsthand, even though it's not compellingly written stuff. I mean, he's clearly a faithful Catholic trying to do his best to work out rational philosophical and theological positions that are at least consistent with uh, revelation, with the teaching of the church. And at many places, he offers that the church teaches it as a reason for holding it, um, even where he himself couldn't find his way to the church's position on fully rational grounds. He was always deferential. So, if you're, let's say you're, how a lot of my friends describe themselves, an unreconstructed Thomist. You're gonna follow Aquinas no matter what. I hope you can read the book, that, yep, he's maybe compatible with Aquinas on this or that issue, fellow travelers, but on that or that issue, no, he's just wrong, just plain old wrong. I know that a lot of my Thomist friends, for example, will really dislike how Scotus understands the connection of the virtues, because he departs from Aquinas on this, and the fact that you could have some virtues without having all the virtues,
right.
would really...
Yeah, that was another place where I wasn't sure about. I mean, it seemed like Aquinas' position on a number of these issues was at the very least more elegant.
Yeah.
Whereas Scotus tends to sort of divide things up, a little bit more and have more complexity, like with his two, affection to the will, or, multiple forms for one thing, and, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Whether it's elegance or just being right. We often, I think it's good for Catholic intellectuals to have a decent storehouse, so to speak, of important theologians and philosophers, especially when they are beatified or are saints, who we learn from and can draw inspiration from, even if we end up disagreeing with on some important issues. And Scotus is certainly one of those. Like I said at the beginning, Aquinas is the preeminent theologian of the church and is my personal favorite, in fact. But I know a lot more about Scotus than most people do, and it's a way that I can serve the intellectual culture and of the church, and hopefully even help people grow closer to God by sharing some of the insights of Scotus in his own intellectual journey. Even where he departs from Aquinas, I think he's always interesting. And, whether it's the multiplicity of substantial forms in a human being, or exactly the connection between the different virtues, and or whether the will has one fundamental affection or orientation, or two or more. Scotus is a distinction maker. He's always trying to find the conceptual, where most thinkers would run concepts together, he's trying to pull them apart. And sometimes he's almost too virtuosic when he's in that mode of making distinctions. Maybe he could be accused of sometimes making distinctions where they don't really need to be made. It's pointless to do so. But that kind of getting carried away is a lot different from how Scotus is often portrayed, which is that he's just a naysayer. He's just a destroyer of tradition, a destroyer of the intellectual synthesis that Aquinas achieved. And it's that nasty take on Scotus that I hope, at the very least, someone who reads the book sympathetically will come away rejecting. We don't need to see Scotus as a bad guy. Maybe you still think he's wrong on this or that topic, but he's not a bad guy.
So his name shouldn't be a byword in the way that, say, William of Occam's tends to be.
Yeah.